In a dramatic turn in the region, President Herzog has formally received a letter from US President Donald Trump urging him to grant a pardon to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose prosecutorial ordeal has loomed over Israeli politics for several years. President Trump's letter calls on President Herzog to fully pardon Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been a formidable and decisive wartime prime minister. It adds, "While I absolutely respect the independence of the Israeli justice system, I believe that this case against Bibi is a political unjustified prosecution." The Israeli presidency responded by publicly releasing the letter. Although the role is largely ceremonial, President Herzog is empowered under Israeli law to grant pardons in exceptional cases, but only after a formal request is made and through the established procedures. Prime Minister Netanyahu, indicted in 2019 on multiple charges, including fraud, breach of trust and accepting gifts, has pleaded not guilty and rejected the allegations as politically motivated. His defense argues that these proceedings have weighed heavily on the political life and elections in Israel, overshadowing domestic affairs. The US intervention has ignited intense debate in Israel and beyond. Analysts say the letter amounts to an unprecedented external push into Israeli internal judicial workings. While the United States remains Israel's closest strategic ally, observers warn this move raises questions about sovereignty and the separation of powers in a democratic system. Meanwhile, on the ground in the occupied West Bank, settlers in the north have carried out a wave of violent attacks. Dozens of masked settlers, according to eyewitnesses, burned tents of Bedouin communities, torched dairy warehouses and targeted farmland during the olive harvest season. Palestinian paramedics treated men with bandaged heads. In widely circulated video footage, Israeli military sources say troops were attacked while detaining 4 settlers who are now in custody with Israeli police. Palestinians complain of near total impunity for settlers and say the objective is to intimidate and displace Palestinians from their land. In response, President Herzog issued a rare public condemnation of settler violence, calling it an unchecked phenomenon requiring elimination. This marks one of his most pointed interventions in security affairs since the war with Hamas and the Gaza hostilities. As for the corruption trial, the Jerusalem District Court has repeatedly postponed hearings, citing diplomatic and security reasons. The trial remains active and shows no sign of concluding soon. Prime Minister Netanyahu's legal team argues that in the midst of wartime responsibilities and national security imperatives, he cannot be subjected to frequent courtroom appearances. Meanwhile, his supporters call the impending prosecution a witch hunt and claim that national leadership is being undermined. The intersection of the US diplomatic intervention, Israel's internal judicial process, and escalating settler violence underlines a moment of intense strain for Israeli democracy and governance. President Herzog now faces a politically charged decision. If he accepts a pardon request, he may provoke a constitutional crisis. If he declines, he risks angering a powerful ally and the Prime Minister's base. For Prime Minister Netanyahu, the stakes are equally high. He continues to lead Israel in a time of heightened regional tension, facing adversaries such as Iran, navigating ceasefire talks with Hamas, and managing ongoing war-related responsibilities. His supporters argue any diversion into legal proceedings undermines national security. His critics maintain that rule of law and accountability must not yield to expediency, even in wartime. The olive harvest season in the West Bank has become yet another battlefield. Palestinian farmers, whose livelihoods depend on the annual crop, say they are now at heightened risk and unable to access their lands without escort. Analysts warn that the violence is part of a broader strategy by hardline settlers to expand territorial control and pressure Palestinians into migration, compounding decades-old grievances. The unprecedented volume of attacks recorded in October gives credence to those warnings. Against this complex backdrop, the letter from President Trump to President Herzog may prove to be a catalytic moment. It forces Israeli institutions, judicial, executive and legislative, to confront the intersection of politics, security, alliance obligations and democracy. By making his plea public, President Herzog's office has signalled that the matter will not be resolved behind closed doors. The coming weeks are likely to see intense internal debate in Israel, how to balance the demands of wartime leadership, the integrity of the legal system, and the pressures of alliance diplomacy. The ramifications extend beyond Israel's borders. US engagement in this case has triggered concern among foreign observers about precedent, whether external leaders may exert influence over another country's judiciary or pardon process. In the Middle East, already a region of contested sovereignty, shifting alliances and fragile peace deals, the optics are particularly sensitive. For ordinary Israelis, the letter may deepen divisions. Some view Netanyahu as a stalwart defender against Iran and Islamist militancy, aligning with President Trump's characterization of a formidable wartime prime minister. Others interpret the pardon plea as confirmation that political favor and power can override justice, potentially undermining the rule of law. If President Herzog eventually acts on the pardon request, he may set a landmark decision with long-term consequences, reconciling wartime exigencies with democratic accountability. If he declines or waits until normal legal procedures run their course, the Prime Minister may continue to lead in limbo under a protracted cloud of indictment and amid partisan polarization. Today, the story touches on three intersecting themes: the power of the judiciary in a democracy at war, the influence of strategic alliances on domestic politics, and the enduring conflict over land and rights in the occupied West Bank. As Israel navigates these pressures, the coming days will test not only its leaders, but the broader structure of Israeli governance. In sum, President Herzog holds the formal authority to pardon, but only through Israeli constitutional process. President Trump has publicly asked him to use it, citing Netanyahu's leadership and the alleged political nature of the prosecution. Prime Minister Netanyahu remains under indictment and in trial, his defense steadfast, his supporters vociferous. Parallel to this, violence tied to the West Bank olive harvest has surged, adding urgency to questions of security, law, and accountability. Israel now stands at a crossroads, with democracy, wartime leadership, and external alliance all converging in one complex prism.